Can't Take It With You is a 1938 film directed by Frank Capra and starring Jean Arthur, Lionel Barrymore, Jimmy Stewart, and Edward Arnold. The film tells the story of a young woman from a very eccentric family who is engaged to the son of an extremely wealthy man. They try to get the two families together, and chaos ensues. Let me start off by saying I'm a big Frank Capra fan. I think he is a fantastic director, and his feel-good movies with a message are always so much fun to watch. His movies are often filled with a sprawling cast full of unique characters, lots of the same character actors show up in them, and he's always trying to build up the common man and encourage the audience. And all of those things can be said of You Can't Take It With You. My favorite of his films is It's a Wonderful Life. It's definitely the one of his movies that I've seen the most, and in fact it's probably one of my most watched movies in general, owing to watching it for many Decembers in a row. I've seen the Mr. Smiths and Mr. Deeds and others, and I love those as well, but a lot of my reference points going forward will be related to It's a Wonderful Life, as I have so much more familiarity with it. The big reason I love You Can't Take It With You is its message regarding the importance of doing what you love and happiness being more important to your life than money. I think that can be a hard thing to achieve, and the movie's portrayal of it is a little simplistic, but it's still a good sentiment. The characters in the movie that all have that view all seem to have just quit their jobs and focused on what they enjoy, which is easier said than done. There is also the theme of a person being rich in friends being better than being rich in terms of monetary wealth, which Frank Capra would explore more fully in It's a Wonderful Life. There's even a scene that is a precursor to the finale of that later movie, where the friends of the Grandpa Vanderhoff character rally around to donate money to pay a fine that has been levied on him. The visuals are almost exactly the same, with people pushing forward to give their money, while the recipient, Grandpa Vanderhoff in this case, George Bailey in the other, look on with surprise and humility. And there's even an official of some kind that tosses in their own money at the last second with a little smile. Here it's the judge that imposed the fine, and in It's a Wonderful Life, the sheriff that has come to arrest George. And he also includes shots during that scene at the courthouse of the everyday people that look on while these things happen. These are just extras, but they're given many shots of them looking concerned or looking hopeful, just a sea of faces. It feels like a nod to the common, average person that had gone through everything that had been happening during the 1930s and is trying to give them a boost, as the wealthier people didn't necessarily suffer in the same way. They reminded me of some shots near the finale of Preston Sturges' Sullivan's Travels, which came 3 years later, of regular people sitting quietly, then laughing while watching a movie. But now let's talk about the cast. Frank Capra could pull together incredible casts, and he definitely did here. Jean Arthur plays Alice Sycamore, the young woman from this very interesting family. Jean Arthur plays the role perfectly, giving us a character that hasn't developed the same level of eccentricity as her family, but has grown up with it and appreciates them all. She could play roles that were wiser to the world, as in Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, or characters that seem more young and innocent, as she does here. Her love interest is played by Jimmy Stewart in his first movie for Frank Capra, and the two of them have amazing chemistry. Their first scenes together, which come a little ways into the movie, are great. You immediately get the sense that they are perfect for each other. Their senses of humor, their banter, everything about them just clicks. And you don't get a feeling of difference between their social classes, as his parents do especially. These are young people that haven't become entrenched in the so-called importance of such things. Jimmy Stewart is very good as well, showing off his gift for comedy, but that's mostly towards the beginning. He's given little moments here and there later on, but to some extent he fades into the background during the middle section of the film, observing the calamities that break out when the two families are brought together. He gets to play some drama as he decides that the family business it was expected he would take over is maybe not for him, after he's been affected by the drive to do what you love by his future in-laws. The true star of the movie, I would say, even though he was billed second, is Lionel Barrymore, playing Grandpa Vanderhoff. He's wonderful in the role, playing this kindly old man that is generous and welcoming to all, and he steals the show in most scenes. It's a pretty lighthearted film much of the time, until close to the end, and a lot of that stems from Lionel Barrymore. He's continually trying to convince people that they should try living his way. If you don't like what you're doing, stop and do something else. Not everything he suggests is practical, such as not paying income tax. That likely wouldn't turn out so well if everybody adopted his viewpoint. But he's also excellent in scenes like the one where he's reminiscing about when he fell in love with his now deceased wife. He makes those moments very moving, and in that scene in particular, Jean Arthur hardly has to do anything but watch him. He just carries the scene so easily. As I've said, being so familiar with It's a Wonderful Life makes this an interesting watch because he and Jimmy Stewart share a couple of scenes, and it just seems wrong to me that George Bailey and Mr. Potter should get along so well. But hey, they're both great actors, and it doesn't take too long to forget about those other characters. Grandpa Vanderhoff is on crutches for the entire movie, apparently owing to his attempting to slide down a banister and getting a sprained ankle. In real life, Lionel Barrymore had quite severe arthritis, so that's why this was written in for the character, which also explains his characters often being in wheelchairs in his movies from the 40s, like his patriarch in Duel in the Sun, and again as Mr. Potter. Edward Arnold plays Anthony Kirby, the father to Jimmy Stewart's Tony Kirby. Edward Arnold is, to me, the ultimate rich guy on screen of the 30s and 40s. Characters like this, or in Easy Living, also with Jean Arthur, are your stereotypical millionaires. Edward Arnold could play these so easily, but in a way, it's a hard part to pull off. He has to be at once the villain of the movie, but not go so far as to bury the soft spot that we're hoping is hidden away inside him. He gives the best unimpressed looks, here concerning a malfunctioning armchair, and can bring out the humor in what could quickly turn into an arrogant, unlikable character. As a quick note, he did a movie called Eyes in the Night from 1942 where he played a blind detective. I saw it once a few years ago and remembered really liking it. I believe there's also a sequel called The Hidden Eye that I have not seen, so I'll have to check that out yet. His wife is played by Mary Forbes, and she can pull off this type of haughty, look down her nose at the rest of the world type of character very well. Maybe too well. It was hard to like her even when we're given hints that she might be changing for the better. Spring Byington plays Jean Arthur's mother, and again, perfect casting. She's this flighty, carefree woman who is constantly writing plays simply because she has a typewriter and is a fun character. Her husband is played by Samuel S. Hines, a fireworks maker who spends most of his time in the basement setting off these creations, which no one seems to mind. I know him best as George Bailey's father, so seeing him as this much more fun-loving man rather than the serious, helpful character from It's a Wonderful Life is quite the change. Donald Meek plays a new recruit to the Vanderhoff Sycamore household, a former accountant now diving into the world of toy making. Never has an actor's real name been so perfect for the characters he often played. This was the year before Stagecoach, where I know him best from, and there too, a very meek character. H.B. Warner has a small role as a business rival of Anthony Kirby's. Another Frank Capra regular, I see him and think, Mr. Gower. His character is a catalyst for the change that we see take place in Anthony Kirby. It's a brief, one-scene role, but H.B. Warner plays it excellently and sets up the following scenes with Edward Arnold. I have to mention, Edward Arnold is brilliant in these scenes, being driven by his financial interests, but wrestling with his own conscience. The way that whole scene is shot is very nice, with H.B. Warner, this lone man at one end of a giant boardroom table, and at the other, Edward Arnold flanked by an army of lawyers and yes-men. H.B. Warner's character isn't really a little guy, he's a relatively wealthy man himself, but it's this great image of a David and Goliath type fight. There are so many others in the cast, I'll try to zip through them. Misha Auer plays a Russian dance instructor who seems to time his lessons around mealtime at the Vanderhoff house. He's very broad, but it's courtesy of his character that we see Edward Arnold engage in some wrestling moves that I think he's pulling off himself, which was very impressive. I realize I'm mentioning Edward Arnold a lot. He's a great actor, what can I say? Ann Miller plays Jean Arthur's sister, maybe my least favorite character. She is constantly dancing, regardless if there is music playing to accompany her. That was the one element of these eccentricities that felt too far or overdone, maybe because of how visual it is, and seems more goofy than anything. Dub Taylor plays her husband, before he became a long-standing B-Western sidekick. Hallowell Hobbs is another fireworks enthusiast, seemingly living in the basement to continually work on them, and he was a lot of fun, like a little boy getting to play all day long. Harry Davenport plays the kindly old judge that the whole group is brought before when they're all arrested. Harry Davenport is great in everything, and livens up what could be a stern judge with lots of little grins to himself and a twinkle in his eye. And finally, Eddie Anderson plays, I don't know, a cook or something at the Vanderhoff house. Of course, he was Rochester on the Jack Benny Show, and I think he's hilarious. This is long before his voice took on that extremely raspy quality that defines Rochester to me, but he's still fun in his brief moments on screen. The majority of the movie takes place in two locations, the Vanderhoff house and the Kirby building. Both of them, and all the sets that they are made up of, are amazing. The Vanderhoff house is this old-looking, cluttered, homey place that is at the same time spacious but cozy. The amount of detail that went into dressing these sets is incredible, and it truly looks like a huge group of people with a variety of interests live there. The basement is this messy workshop with activity and people moving everywhere. And in contrast, the Kirby building is this grand display of 1930s architecture. There are marble columns, ornate woodwork, glistening boardroom tables everywhere, even the hallways and elevators. Everything looks amazing. I am consistently amazed by the amount of work that used to go into building these sets back then. Now they can just build the bare minimum and put up some blue panels and fill it in later, but in the old days they must have had construction crews working around the clock. The name Frank Capra meant a huge budget at this point in time. Getting to see the streets and traffic of 1938 New York is a real treat, and the house where the Vanderhoffs live is in one of those New York neighborhoods that seem to only exist in movies. There are very seldom any vehicles driving by, huge groups of people can assemble in the middle of the street and nobody seems to mind. It shows a very communal, close atmosphere, and without explanation confirms to the audience that this is the type of environment that the Vanderhoffs and Sycamores have created around them. One of my favorite moments in the entire movie concerns Edward Arnold again, and an elevator. I don't want to spoil it all if you haven't seen it, but that moment is set up beautifully long in advance, and when you realize what is happening, it's so satisfying and gives that character the end of an excellent arc. The whole scene with this tight close-up on his face, the crowd of applauding people, it's all heightened, to be sure, but it's perfect for the tone of the movie and leads to a great ending. You Can't Take It With You is an excellent movie and deservedly won the Oscar for Best Picture in 1938. It also brought Frank Capra his third Oscar for Best Director after having won for It Happened One Night and Mr. Deeds Goes to Town. If you're in the mood for a movie that will boost your spirits and present a world of interesting characters that you can relax in for a couple of hours, you can't go wrong. Highly recommended. Thanks so much for watching my review. If you enjoyed it, I hope you'll check out some more of my reviews over on Hildebrand Productions. Thanks again, and adios for now.